into the side as well. So wanted to introduce Phragmites. It's kind of an interesting species. It's so diverse in terms of its establishment and reality in terms of how it impacts municipalities all across the province. In Northern Ontario, when I'm working with communities like Kenora and Thunder Bay and even over to Sault Ste. Marie, there's not a lot of Phragmites, relatively speaking. It's a great opportunity where we can talk about eradication and trying to get rid of all of the frag that's actually within their regions. And we have the same conversation in Southern Ontario, Central Ontario, and Eastern Ontario. It's a very different conversation, as I'm sure you well know. So, trying to speak to all today, and happy to kind of field any questions through the chat as they come up too, and try and tailor some of this messaging directly to you and your community and your state of frag, if you will. So thank you for joining today. As mentioned, I'm the policy manager at the Invasive Species Centre. I'm based out of Peterborough, Ontario, but a lot of my work is really scoped at a provincial scale and supporting municipalities all across the province in furthering their efforts on invasive species, forest pests, aquatic plants, aquatic species generally, and of course, Phragmites. And so where I'm hoping to go today is really a two-parter. Probably presenting for about 35 minutes or so. And so we'll get you back on your way and into your afternoon shortly. And what I wanted to speak to is just trying to level set with everybody in terms of, what is Phragmites if you're newer to the conversation as well. Just what are some of the impacts and what are some of the kind of key facts and figures that we can be using collectively to communicate the impact of Phragmites in terms of ecological, social, and economic as well. And then I want it to be solution oriented and give you some options in terms of resources that exist on Phragmites. If your municipality is maybe starting out or contemplating starting out on addressing Phragmites. And so wanted to speak to some of the benefits and resources we have that can support multi-partner collaboration. What are some of the best practices and touch lightly on some of the technical information and resources that exist to support your efforts as well. And also, of course, talk about some money, resources and granting programs that are available to support municipalities, conservation authorities, First Nations, and all kinds of communities and individuals across the province here to further their efforts, expand their efforts on FRAG. So just to level set, we're talking about Phragmites, and so I'm sure you're more than aware, probably regrettably so, about the impact of invasive species broadly, because they add up and they can become very costly when they hit your desk. But just to level set quickly, when we're talking about invasive species, we're talking about kind of a two-parter definition. A species that has expanded its geographic range beyond its kind of historical native range. And so most of our invasive species in Ontario and in Canada more broadly are coming from similar or comparable climates. So we look to Europe, we look to Asia in terms of where species with, reasonably comparable climates could, self-select, if you like, and do well in a Canadian and an Ontario context. But that's not enough. If it's a species that comes from afar and is brought over, that would mean it's an exotic species. But it's invasive. It meets that higher standard, if you like, of invasive when it has a negative impact on the economy, the ecology or the environment, or the society more broadly in terms of social ways as well. So some of the ones I know you're regrettably very familiar with would be other species. Giant hogweed would be one. That's the one that we see usually in late June and into July. We see lots of media coverage on the really harmful burns that the sap can cause in terms of skin irritation. We hear lots about emerald ash borer, one of the most costly invasive species, and ash tree specific forest pest as well. So we talk about Asian carp in terms of aquatic fish species as well. So there's a broad group of taxa or group of species that could fit into this. But here today we're really here to talk about Phragmites. And so how do invasive species spread around? Different pathways, different mechanisms. They can be naturally dispersed. They can move around with a little help from their friends. So some common pathways we often see forest pests move around really well on things like firewood. That's why buy local wood and burn local wood is a really important message we try and get it wherever we can. They can, of course, move around on other pathways, which, try as some might. We can't regulate the birds. So we see hemlock woolly adelgid being a new forest pest on the scene, especially in southern Ontario and central Ontario. impacts hemlock trees, and that's moving around primarily through birds as a happy hitchhiker, a bit of a bystander. And we see also contaminated equipment moving around from site to site, also a great pathway in terms of spreading root material. It's caught up in tracks or
Definitely.
material and other things as well. So, and of course, just be it worms or invasive seeds, other things moving around on the heels of our shoes as we go from site to site, either in a work context or in a recreational context. These things can move around, and that's really the challenge, is that they're coming from a variety of different pathways, and it really depends on what the species we're talking about. How do we target? But if we did want to focus in a little bit more on Phragmites, which is the star of the show today, sorry, my slides are acting up here. Really it's moving around two ways primarily. It's moving around through wind dispersed seeds. So Phragmites is that tall invasive plant we see in too many of our ditches and wetlands. And so really long distance, we're looking at seed dispersal being the primary vector for how this species moves between sites, between roadways, between ditches. And then the second pathway is really about contaminated heavy equipment moving from one site to another. And so that could happen within a site, just roadside ditching, maybe that's happening in one part of the road, and then county road down, when that equipment moves with it, so too can the Phragmites. Or we can see it with highway expansion projects as well, and that being an important vector for spread as well. So it moves around different scale and different distances, but if you're looking for those two ways that frag moves around, it's a helpful movement in terms of uh, people assisting via heavy equipment contamination, and then also more natural ways in terms of wind. And if we're thinking about it in kind of a higher level context here for a second, really this diagram I think is most helpful because it helps us understand, think about dollar values on the y-axis going up. The longer things are established, the more expensive they become to eradicate, if they're even possible at all. And so the earlier we can have an opportunity to intervene, ideally prevention, that's not the municipality's primary function in most cases. That's the federal government through a number of different agencies, and to some degree the province as well. And really, eradication is also kind of a really effective and efficient timeline in terms of intervention. Containment, if there's only one or two patches of a species or a couple populations, this is still a very cost-effective window. And really, the higher on in terms of where these establishment levels come, the less cost-effective it can be. But it doesn't mean that it's not worth doing still. We see a lot of flooding happening with well-established species like Phragmites when it clogs up roadside ditches and drains. We see even a lot of sightline interactions too in terms of roadside management and the potential for incident occurrence as a result of that. So it's not to diminish at all the opportunity to intervene with still later stages of establishment. But in a perfect world here, it's an easier conversation to have, quite frankly, in Northern Ontario when there's not a lot of Phragmites present, and the opportunity for extremely high cost benefit returns is absolutely present and strong. And so I think this is a useful diagram in terms of thinking about invasive species presence nationally, even provincially too at that scale, but also within a municipality. It's still a relevant framework because if we start thinking about this in terms of more rural parts of our municipality versus more urban spaces and farther afield places, it's the same dynamic, it's the same framework. The earlier we can intervene, the smaller a population is, the quicker we can get ahead of it, as most things are. The more cost effective and the higher return on our investment we're gonna be able to achieve. So I think it's a useful framework for us. And we could talk all day about the number of species at risk or important biodiversity rationale for why invasive Phragmites response is not just justified, but imperative for us to kind of promote healthy, biodiverse, resilient communities, especially in the face of changing climate. But really, I think this image does it well. This is a perfect example of what a wetland, about a shoreline can and will look like once Phragmites has come to establish itself. And this kind of ecosystem is important for biodiversity reasons, social reasons in terms of public access to waterfronts and natural assets as well, and a variety of others. So I think it's really important just to kind of in one image explain this is the scope and magnitude of the issue. And I respect as well that there's probably a lot of folks from very different communities here, from the north to the east to rural to urban. And so this issue manifests itself in different ways, depending on whereabouts you are in the province. And so I think this is a good cautionary tale, something that we might expect to see once upon a time in southwestern Ontario, and maybe still today in some parts of the province, in terms of what can happen and the scale and pure magnitude of the issue if left unchecked. It is literally just a transformative species in terms of how it interacts with our habitats, and of course, degrading habitat quality for the species that are there, be them species at risk turtles, ground nesting birds, other plant species, anything, all these ecosystem building blocks here that make up diverse communities. And if you're more inclined to hear about the dollars and cents of the issue, I've got some important information to relay as well, because I think what things I've learned is that people hit it on different messages here. So, a really interesting paper that came out last year, which I think sets the tone in terms of how costly are invasive species globally. It is really interesting. Biological invasions or invasive species globally are actually on par with earthquakes, and floods. So it kind of blew me away. It's hard to put your issue in terms of a broader context, but I think this paper does it really well. When we start to stack up these issues as against other kind of catastrophic issues and natural hazard related issues here, the biological invasions stack up considerably on a global perspective in terms of the costs and the dollars and cents. But let's bring that number home a little bit more in terms of the Ontario context. When we look at all species together, they have become very costly to Ontario. And of course, very costly to Ontario means very costly to Ontario's municipalities. And so what we did in 2019 and 2017 before that was try and understand how much our municipality is spending. And just wanted to, I always like to say an appreciation note here in case anybody on the call did contribute data to the survey. It was really important information. We're happy to be able to share it. And so what were we able to come up with? Well, first of all, I put a caveat on all the numbers you see here. They are underestimates by design. This is about how many dollars and cents we were able to source back in terms of budgets. But the one thing we know about invasive species is they manifest themselves in a variety of places throughout our budgets. Our budgets tend to not, some municipalities do organize by invasive species as a line item, but most do not. Most of these rear their head in different public works or different department budgets too, in different contexts as well. So I just want to put the caveat out there that these numbers, although important, they are absolutely underestimates because this is just what we were able to quickly source back in terms of budgets. And again, when I say quickly, I just wanted to underscore how appreciative we are for those who did chase down this data line by line, because it really helps us paint the current vision and current picture, at least in terms of Ontario's costs. So high level, what are the top line numbers here? About $51 million a year is what municipalities and conservation authorities, which are largely funded by municipalities, are spending, and they're on the hook for invasive species management. And in terms of what species are being managed, well, generally they're not prevention-oriented priorities. These species priorities tend to be responsive in nature. This is the FRAG roadside management, which is largely going to be complaint driven. In terms of when are we responding to and getting rid of Phragmites, it's because that patch of Phragmites clogged up the roadside drain and thus contributed to some flooding and had a number of people calling about it. That's really where we see these. These are response oriented. Other things like emerald ash borer, hazard tree removal. We'll speak on a species by species basis in a moment here, but that's generally where these are going. And I want to note as well that we have a wide range, as we'd expect, in terms of expenditures by municipality and conservation authority as well. So we tried to chunk these out by region as well and try and tell the story in a little bit more detail, based on population density. And of course, it was really interesting. We see some large municipalities able to invest in a larger way, some smaller rural municipalities unable, of course, to expend the same amount of resources on the issue. But no matter who you are, where you are across the province, every municipality is spending some money on invasive species management and response, and spending them on a variety of species priorities as well. So the average municipality, if you're keeping track at home, was spending about $218,000. I think these are 2019 dollars too, so a little bit less purchasing power. But in terms of if you're looking for those baseline stats, that's on average what each municipality was spending, and by conservation authority about $315,000 if you round up. being spent per year as well. So substantial resources. Again, these numbers by design are underestimates. There are more dollars and cents being allocated towards invasive species in terms of municipal and CA budgets across the province, but this is the baseline information that we were able to assess based on this study design. And in terms of what are the species that we're spending on and investing within, the two that I wanted to raise to your attention in terms of those roadside mindset here. I mean, Phragmites is the big species. That's the species I'm here to talk about today. But wild parsnip, especially in Eastern Ontario, from Ottawa to Perth, all along Highway 7, we're seeing a lot of municipalities have to respond to other species like a wild parsnip and even giant hogweed for some other municipalities in terms of their roadside veg management. So, I guess one of the points to make here is that even though emerald ash borer dominates the spending, and just because those are expensive assets to have to manage in terms of our urban forest canopy, and just to put it in context, York Region, before emerald ash borer, 10% of the regional forest cover was ash trees. Now, considerably less, regrettably, because of this invasive species. And so removing all of those trees, replanting those trees, be them actively infested trees, or just preventative removal and replanting, really expensive assets, obviously, as you well know, to manage. Of course, there's some trees being treated as well, which is commendable and really important. Also extremely expensive in terms of a management approach too. So, emerald ash borer, at a high level note, dominates the spending. But when we start to look to other species like Phragmites and wild parsnip, those really add up too in terms of roadside management here. I just want to note as well, I think if there was one species that, my gut tells me is maybe underrepresented in this, it's got to be Phragmites is extremely expensive in terms of its roadside management too. And I think if there was one species that was a little difficult for us to really mine the data that was required for this study, it was probably that one species. Again, we know for sure that $2.8 million in that fiscal year 2019 year was spent on that species. But if I had to guess, I'd say it's probably at least double. Substantial investments from municipalities and more increasing in time in terms of what each municipality is investing in Phragmites management. And the good news is especially if you're a smaller municipality and Frag is relatively under established in your municipality, it can be pretty cost effective in terms of getting ahead of it. So, would offer a bit of a positive note on that regard as well. So that's high level, and we did break it down by species within it. And really what we realized after that 2019 and about 2020, 2021, was that there's a lot of cost on Phragmites, and that survey maybe didn't perfectly reflect all of the spending. Those numbers were true, but we think it's substantially higher. And so what we did at that point was work with an environmental economist out of University of Guelph to try and assess, okay, what are the true costs? What is a cost benefit analysis on Phragmites in terms of its impacts and also opportunities within Ontario? And so if Ontario was magically to get to earn ourselves into a frag-free state, that would take a long time and a lot of money. But if we were in that scenario, what would the benefits be economically in terms of, not just actually environmental benefits, but just the hard dollars and cents? What would it do to our budget in a positive way? And so the environmental economists went through that exercise here and took a lot of assumptions, as well as just pulled data from a variety of sources. And this is really, I think, the best work done to date. There's still opportunities to improve it for sure, but I think it does kind of pull out some really interesting talking points and considerations as well in terms of what are just the economic impacts of Phragmites. And so top line number here, the annual benefits of Phragmites control per this report were assessed to be about $113 million every year. And so those are annually recurring numbers. So they'll start to add up if you start to expand the horizon out to a 5-year mindset, a 10-year mindset, they'll really substantially increase. And then the other interesting piece as well was the study kind of goes into more detail than I can today, but they look at a one-time benefit to property owners as well, to waterfront property owners, and they assess the value of that to be about $357 million in terms of positive increases to property value. So really interesting. We start to look at this in terms of like a 5-year mindset, $113 million plus, we're starting to look at like 800, $900 million in terms of surplus value here. And in terms of the cost of getting to that frag-free reality, it's truly hard to say. Some of the best work on that this report does cite is generally about $100 million in terms of the Ontario-wide context. What would it take to get rid of every stick of frag out there? Is that realistic? Maybe not, probably not. But in terms of just kind of going through the exercise here and demonstrating the case for increased response on Phragmites, it's a really helpful piece. Now, those are pretty high level numbers. Those are a provincial scale and scope. And again, it's sometimes easier just to kind of speak in terms of that local context piece. And so one of the interesting conversations that I tend to be asked is just, okay, what's this going to cost me on like a per kilometer basis? And so if we're just managing roadside ditches and interested, and I'm asked the question by council, how much is this costing us per kilometer? $1,100 is a really useful kind of tangible number that people can wrap their head around. How much does it cost to manage 1 linear kilometer of roadside ditch for Phragmites? But a number of people trying to assess that, and this is the average value between those. And of course, the first year of managing that patch versus the fourth year or third year, even, usually you get good control by second, third, fourth year. So is not going to be $1,100 every year. But if we start to use back of the envelope calculation number, this is a really useful tool in terms of figuring out that. So if you have roadside kilometer, linear kilometer of frag, that's roughly what you're looking at for a first year management. And nationally, we've done a similar exercise in terms of just trying to understand how much are people spending on invasive species and where are those pressure points in terms of municipal budgets. And so one of the projects we did a couple years later, I think it was 2021 as a follow-up there, was just trying to look at larger municipalities because that was the scope of the study and understanding how much are we spending nationally. We knew the Ontario number, about $51 million, but how much are we spending as a country? And the number we pulled out of that, there's a range of models, but $250 million is a pretty useful number too. And again, that was 2021 numbers too. So we saw reasonably comparable figures in terms of what the average municipality was spending there. So, I guess the one takeaway here is we're not alone in terms of an Ontario context, in terms of what we're actively investing, be it emerald ash borer and tree species to roadside veg management in terms of Phragmites or wild parsnip or similar species. So that's the dollars and cents, that's the ecological impacts. And the last thing I wanted to leave off in terms of scoping the issue here is really what is this costing us in terms of social aspects? And I think the best and most commonly and widely cited issue here is really about water access. These beautiful community assets, which are expensive to maintain and absolute drivers behind local tourism and even visitors within our municipalities, but local beaches too. That is prime frag habitat, regrettably. And so we've seen it to be, left unchecked, very expensive. It's a very good invasive species, Phragmites is. And so this is kind of a, cautionary tale, I guess, in terms of that. So the upper left image there, we've seen a lot of communities, around Georgian Bay would be a great example of a few communities there. The municipality of Tiny being a great example there too, in terms of just local community-led, physical removal tends not to be herbicide. Physical removal via, cane cutters, raspberry cane cutters or shovels or spades or other similar tools there. And we see good community response in terms of that and reasonably good efficacy. Of course, it's largely very heavy and hard work. It's volunteer driven. But these are important kind of community responses, I think, to the issue if left unchecked. And the challenge really here is about water access. So in terms of us using that, Phragmites is a good invasive species, like I say, be it on sandy, dry, higher, more upland sites, the higher parts of a beach, or via standing up in standing water, like you see in the upper right, very pixelated image there. So we see Phragmites doing very well in terms of standing water, very well in terms of roadside ditches, very well in terms of like even some restored gravel pits. I've seen Phragmites does just fine. Thank you very much. So are really important to get out and get ahead of it, because I think if left unchecked, this is the kind of habitat that Phragmites can do very well at and ultimately become very costly in terms of volunteer efforts and just the dollars and cents as well. So that's the doom and gloom, and here's the solution. What I wanted to do was speak to a few different examples of solutions and resources that are on the table that I think I would like more municipalities specifically to be aware of. And the first, I think, is the problem we're trying to solve here is a bit dynamic, right? It involves, as you well know, you know, public right of ways that are right adjacent to small nooks and crannies of private property, and maybe there's an MTO road just above, and maybe there's a regional road just beside, and that's a really challenging environment to work within. I just wanted to acknowledge that I think that it's important to identify that that's a real pickle. It's a real difficult task, and this is kind of really, in terms of my perspective, what I'm trying to solve here, the really dynamic problem I'm trying to solve. And so, I think I'm going to speak to a few resources that exist that can help on a per manager by per manager basis, help us be better land managers in terms of Phragmites response, and a few financial resources as well. But really, I just want to acknowledge that this is the challenge: is the municipality can do the right thing on this and do the roadside ditch management here, but if left unchecked and the opportunity for reseeding from private lands realizes and materializes itself, this is a challenge that's not a sustainable solution. So I just wanted to acknowledge that this is really the problem we're trying to solve: is multiple landowner collaboration, and just understanding the fact that it's not just the municipality who might be doing the right thing in this treated example. Really, we got to find a way to work with those private landowners, and that can't fall to the municipality, because obviously the resources don't exist, and maybe, and if they did, even still, sometimes it's a hard conversation for a perception of government to private landowner conversation to happen. Sometimes it's helpful to have a non-government intermediary in a sense. And I just wanted to as well identify that, sustainable solutions in even the fraggiest of fragging communities here in Long Point, in southwestern Ontario, and Norfolk County are attainable. Like, this is used to be frag ground zero, if you like. And through the leadership of Nature Conservancy of Canada, the federal government through Environment and Climate Change Canada, through CWS, the province through the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, private hunt clubs as well, private landowners of all kinds, a really broad kind of partner perspective here, Indigenous communities as well, First Nation communities as well, are midway through project here that's designed and on track to maybe not eradicate Phragmites, but pay the capital deposit here on substantially scaling back the amount of Phragmites that's present. And the reason why this is such an important case study here is because it identifies perfectly multiple partners collaborating together: the county, the lower tier municipality, federal government, provincial government, private property owners as well. All of those partners coming together and doing a fantastic job in terms of identifying opportunity. And so the municipality here has a really, really important role in terms of monitoring, mapping, understanding the scope of the issue on their right of ways, be it parks or be it municipal roadsides and drains as well. So a really important piece of this puzzle. And I think that it's within this example, it's not a done story. It's approaching its first decade of work. It's substantial in terms of its resourcing, in terms of the federal government, provincial government, and I don't want to undermine the municipal engagement as well. But what are we seeing here? The leading candidate for what Phragmites management at a landscape scale can look like. To really, again, if you think back a couple slides ago, avoid that image of treated, untreated, that municipal right of way and private landowner piece. This is the case study we're holding up as something that's solved it. And again, it's not an end story. We're still working through this. All the partners on this project are still actively engaged in managing frag here. And I don't think it's ever going to get to a point where it's legitimately Phragmites free, but it is a substantial reduction in terms of it, a substantial reduction in terms of its impacts to the ecology and the environment and the economics as well of the region. And it's bought the time that's needed for a more sustainable Phragmites solution namely a biocontrol agent that's been sparsely dispersed in Ontario and released in 30 sites in Ontario, to buy us the time for that solution to come online. So to take that and kind of scale it up, one of the things that we've done here is build a resource called the Regional Plan Guidebook that was released in February or March, I guess, of 2024. So relatively new on the scene. And basically, this guide is not the best practices document. That does exist, and I'll speak to that in a moment. But what this guidebook does is for municipalities, for conservation authorities, for road supers, for anyone who's interested in scaling up their Phragmites effort or making the most out of what they're doing on Phragmites, this is the pathway to multi-partner collaboration. It's a how-to guide to form good relationships, good functioning tables with local partners, help you identify who would be managing Frag, who should I be asking, what are you doing on Phragmites management? So this is a perfect starting point in terms of we've done a site or two of management and we want to figure out a more sustainable, higher scaled approach. This is the resource for you. So I'll send around the link, maybe if we could after the webinar as well. I think it's a really useful resource. It's a great how-to guide. And so that doesn't speak to how do you get rid of Phragmites. It's in the philosophical sense, but in terms of how do we get rid of patch of Phragmites, there's two great resources I wanted to promote here. And there's a best management practices document, which is a really popular document. It just got a new update on in late February this year as well. It's available online as well. The document was first created by the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. It's a fantastic resource. Some of the great new updates include information on new herbicides that have come online that are available for use in Ontario in standing water environments. And if you're unfamiliar, that has generally been a bit of a challenge in terms of management. A lot of municipal Phragmites management, of course, tends to be herbicide, largely because of the scale. There's other best practices too, but that tends to be the best practice when we're talking about large scale. And for a long time, there was no licensed herbicide that had on-label use for standing water. So if you're managing a roadside ditch and there's standing water today, no spray has been generally the rule. But thankfully, the BMP update now includes new information from a couple years ago of a newly licensed pair of products, actually. So, nice new information in that regard. Also, some good guidance in terms of working in more sensitive habitats. How can we be most thoughtful if there might be species at risk or other, high sensitive habitat types nearby? What are the best practices if we're looking to start up some mapping and monitoring? And how should we be doing that? How can we be most effective? What do we need to do versus what do we want to do? So really useful information. So that's the best management practices document. It's 40 pages or so of really nicely designed, graphically designed PDF. It's available for free download off of the website and a few others where it's cross-posted as well. And then the other document I wanted to promote, if you've gone through the BMP and maybe some of your staff are into fragging, I've done some roadside frag management. The other really helpful resource which I wanted to promote was what we call the technical bulletin. That was also updated in February as well. That's got the nitty gritty. What are the concentrations? What are the best practices in terms of application? The information that's consistent with what's on the label, but just some other perspectives from other land managers in terms of just other tips that are label compliant, but also just developed from people who have been doing a lot of Phragmites control across the province as well. So two really helpful resources, both updated fairly recently. So I just wanted to put that on your radar. So if you're new to Phragmites management, or even if you're well established, there's hopefully some good, useful information in both of those resources there for you. So I wanted to promote that. Talked a lot about things that cost money. So I just wanted to acknowledge as well that municipalities, conservation authorities, municipalities specifically are really at the pointy end of the stick in terms of many issues, many problems, and, tapped out in terms of new funding opportunities. And so we've heard that feedback, of course, on a variety of issues, but within my context in invasive species, heard loud and clear. And we've taken that away and tried to advocate for, enhanced funding from other funding sources, both the federal and provincial government. And to their credit, the province has stepped up year over year for 5 years. They funded a granting program that we run. It started modest. It's growing in size considerably. It's called the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund. And this program is now in its fifth year. It's, as the name implies, Phragmites specific. So be it a new Phragmites program that you're interested in exploring and expanding, or perhaps something that you wanted to expand. It's well established as a program, but you need that last year of funding to help get it across the finish line. Would encourage you to consider having your municipality apply for this. This really was a funding program designed for municipalities in mind, conservation authorities, First Nations communities, green groups, like any registered non-governmental organization, all eligible to apply. But municipalities is really one of the key audiences this fund is designed for. And the closing date is a week and a day away. So it's actually a pretty light application. I know there's some applications that you do the cost benefit on, is the juice worth the squeeze? I'm biased, of course, but I do think this funding opportunity is quite worthwhile. It's only, if you have the project scoped in your mind now, maybe it's an existing project or something that's sitting on the back burner looking for some resourcing. It could take you 45 minutes, to be quite truthful, in terms of submitting that application. So we really designed it to be time efficient in mind in terms of applying and also managing and reporting out. So I just wanted to make the note that that's top of mind for us. And municipalities across the province, as well as other groups, have made use of this since its inception 5 years ago. So you've got municipalities on there like Town of Ajax has put in, Brant County, municipality of Whitestone. So large municipalities, small municipalities, Town of Mono, large municipalities, small municipalities, green groups, everybody in between basically who wants to do something on Phragmites have been recipients under this fund the last few years. And so I just wanted to promote it because I think it's a timely way of communicating out that we know this costs money, and we respect that, municipal resources are limited and tight, and we need to demonstrate good use of taxpayer resources. And I hope that this can be a useful funding mechanism to double up the impact that you've got. So there is, just to cut right to it, there is a one-to-one matching requirement, but we don't require cash being matched. In-kind contributions, and truthfully, we are generous in terms of the interpretation of that, in my opinion. Be the existing staffing resources, you've already done some of the monitoring, you're looking for this to be a control complementary project, that would absolutely leverage up in terms of a one-to-one match. Volunteer removal efforts, we're looking to capture every minute of volunteer time. Equipment and resourcing, absolutely, those are critically important components of a good project proposal. So those would count as in-kind contributions. It doesn't need to be matching cash. And in terms of the dollar and cents of what's available, we're looking at up to $50,000 on the table per project. So that can be a really helpful resource line that, it might not solve all your Phragmites problems in terms of your municipality and managing on your roadsides, but I hope that it can be a useful down payment in terms of maybe developing some pilot sites, or maybe doing that comprehensive monitoring mapping project, maybe extending some summer staff into the fall to be able to do a thorough inventory of all of your municipal roads for Phragmites so that you could do some control work next year. I think it's a plastic fund, and we've designed it with municipalities in mind. So the program objectives, really, what are we looking to fund here through this? It's the best practices I spoke about before. It's about mapping and developing some kind of thoughtful integrated plans and approaches. It could be designed for municipal properties only. It could be designed for other municipalities and partners aligned as well, and be more of a comprehensive approach. Would probably be a stronger path, to be frank. But yeah, it could be mapping and strategy development. It doesn't need to be about frag control right now. And really anything we can do to amplify and expand control work as well would also be a great project. So maybe you've already done the mapping and strategy development piece and you're looking to support action. This would be a good funding mechanism for you to consider. The other pieces as well, if this connects with you, are you on the leading edge of Phragmites generally? In southwestern Ontario, there's lots of Phragmites. The Frag Fund is designed to support you in mind, but the Frag Fund is also very much designed to support municipalities in the north or in more rural communities as well. Maybe there's not as much Phragmites present in terms of central Ontario or northern Ontario or near north. where hopefully this can be a really helpful funding mechanism to you to address a problem that might not be as bad as it could be eventually or will be eventually. So I hope that's useful as well in terms of those control-oriented projects and those leading edge projects. And the last thing, I think these resources are are designed to support collaboration. So maybe it's addressing some additional staff time, maybe it's working with an external partner and they're the applicant that they could bring together and coordinate volunteers or other community partners as well to get everybody on the same page in terms of who's doing what on Phragmites and what are the opportunities for some shared wins. It's really what the fund is designed to do. So some of these program priorities in terms of what would a good project look like as I wind down here, I'd say first of all, anything that's mapping, monitoring, or strategy development or planning associated, those would be great projects. And it could be, like I say before, extending the contract of some summer staff and maybe purchasing some gas money and a tablet and buying some GIS time if you should be so fortunate, to be able just to produce a comprehensive map of this is where our Phragmites is within our municipality. It's a great first step. It's a perfect first step. It could, if you have that done already, maybe you're looking to do a more control-oriented project here, where you know about where some of those patches are. You've already got them mapped. You really just need the money to hire a contractor or maybe do the control work in-house already. It's a great project as well. So would encourage you to think about that as a really useful project as well. And just to kind of scope this in nicely, it could be about frag removal. It could also be about restoration. We really encourage as much of the funds through the fund, much of the resources through the fund to go towards Phragmites removal and control as possible. But if there's other things in terms of introducing native species, or if you really want to escalate the opportunity here to completing a controlled burn, so you can expose the native seed bank below and save some money on the restoration piece if that's where you're going. All of those would be eligible project costs as well. In terms of innovation, that's a critically important piece because well, unless we're innovating, that we're probably going to stay where we are. So in terms of that Phragmites removal piece, would just encourage any innovation. And that might be innovation to you as a municipality. Maybe you're trying an overwater herbicide for the first time and you want to develop that capacity in-house. Or maybe there's other best practices that are slightly adapted for your specific unique constraints or your specific unique site. That might be a little bit at the edge of what the best management practices PDF document that I said earlier says. Those would be all great eligible projects as well. So this year, the exciting thing in past years, we had a $10,000 per project cap. As I mentioned earlier, we've expanded the cap this year. So most projects we're anticipating to come in and then that have already come in and will come in over the next week and change are between $2,500 and $25,000. But we do also just acknowledge if you've got an existing Phragmites program and it's well integrated with external partners, and it truly is kind of a landscape scale collaboration effort, you can exceed that cap and go up to $50,000 as a hard limit, if you like. So, we're really excited about the opportunity to support maybe a higher level or a higher scope of work as well this year with some of these new Frag Fund modifications this year. So as I say, it's due May 30th. It's a week and a day away, but would encourage you to check it out. Again, it's a pretty light application in terms of, maybe an hour if it's already the idea and the concept is already scoped. We're looking for projects to have a one-to-one match, but again, how we assess what is that match, it doesn't need to be cash only. It could be no cash, an all volunteer match, or a variety of other sources, be the existing equipment depreciation and a bunch of other things too. So I would encourage you to think about that as an opportunity to support some of your Phragmites management ambitions and interests. And you can learn more about it on our website at Invasive Species Centre, center with an RE, .ca /grants, GRANTS. So like I said before, I think many people are in a very different place in terms of their frag journeys, and that's okay. In the north, it's early detection and rapid response. In the south, it is really about addressing the biggest concerns first that are contributing to flooding, or a number of other like pressing issues. And so I just wanted to design some kind of guidance here in terms of just a few bullets for people to walk away with and hopefully operationalize if you're newer to frag. Um, I would say first, assess what's already underway. Like, I think that municipal economics study that I had mentioned from 2019 really showed me is that most municipalities are already spending in this space, and they're already spending on Phragmites. They just might not call it Phragmites or invasive species removal. Many municipalities would classify some of those budget responses under nuisance vegetation and roadside veg management, or just roadside ditching. And unfortunately, Phragmites finds its stolons or its tendrils or its roots into a variety of different budget lines as well. So I'd encourage you to think about what's already underway. What is your municipality already up to if you think you might be new to Frag? That either something that you're doing or even your neighboring municipality might be up to already, or region, or the province if MTO is managing roads in your area as well. And mapping, if you're looking for that first, low hanging fruit that's still tasty, I'd say, monitoring and mapping roadside assets, it's really cost effective. That would be a beautiful frag fund application that honestly you could probably accomplish with like a $5,000 to $10,000 proposal. So it's pretty cost effective. You could inventory them all. I know it's easier said than done, but that's a great place to start in terms of either what a municipality could submit or what other community partners could submit as well. And I'd suggest being selective in your control efforts. What probably those municipal inventories would tell you, especially if you're in southwestern and central Ontario or maybe eastern Ontario too, is that there's a fair bit of frag out there. And how do we start? How do we prioritize management sites? It's a challenge. It can be a challenge, and sometimes I feel like there's no perfect answer. But the best answer we can give, and what we hear from our municipal partners, tends to be just start small, focus in on those winnable battles, build up those pilot case studies where you can gain confidence either internally within your staff or externally within partner contractors. And choose those sites that can protect your key assets in terms of maybe provincially significant wetlands or some of those beach assets that I showed earlier. And ultimately, just like Phragmites, grow over time. Take those lessons learned and apply them to other sites. And really, I think probably the most important piece here is collaboration is key, because the random acts of Phragmites stewardship approach that we've taken for a while in Ontario, really hasn't delivered that comprehensive approach that's kind of thoughtful and strategic and really demonstrates the best bang for our collective buck here. So other groups like municipalities, conservation authorities, non-government organizations, and others are really doing excellent work now. And I think that, if we're able to take those random acts of stewardship and stitch them together into a comprehensive program and comprehensive community-based action, I think that's really where the opportunity lies, the sweet spot is for future growth. So I just wanted to pass that on in case maybe Frag is a little bit, you're newer to the Frag community. First of all, welcome. Second of all, I'm sorry. And just hopefully some of those are useful bits of advice in terms of growing and expanding your capacity and interest on the species, which continues to rear its ugly head. And so, with that in mind, would encourage you, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat there or fire me a note after if you want to talk about something in a little more detail than we have the capacity to hit today. But I just want to thank you for your attention, and again, wish you a happy Public Works Week. It's an exciting week, and appreciate all the work that you're already doing to help keep our communities moving, productive, and safe. So thank you.
So thank you, Colin, very much for your presentation. That was a lot of good information. And I just want to open it up if anybody has any questions. I know there's no questions in the chat. So if anyone online has anything to ask. And I don't see anyone jumping up, but I know you've left your email there, and definitely feel free to reach out to Colin or as well to anyone on the AORS team if there's something that we can help you with. So thank you very much, Colin, for your presentation. And I look forward to seeing everyone else for the rest of the week for all of our webinars. So thanks. Oh, sorry. I just had a question pop in, so we won't actually quit up. So we have a question from Jeremy. Does the Invasive Species Center have any wording that can help municipalities create an RFP for creating a management plan, inventory, or tender?
We don't. That would be a great addition to the guidebook. So, Jeremy, I'm going to take that idea and run with it. So, ask me in a year, and I'll have that ready to go. We do have community of practice for invasive species practitioners for municipalities and CAs. And so I would ask that kind of question to them. So let me run with that idea, find it, and then if you wanted to follow up with me, my email's on the screen there. I'll try and track a good copy down that might be an easy copy and paste for you.
Perfect. And we're happy as well. As I had said before, we've recorded this session. We can post Colin's slides as well as additional information on the AR's website. And we'll also put it out in our e-newsletter next week. So again, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing everyone the rest of the week in the rest of our webinars. So have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.